The stone did not like the way most people walked on it. Jonah had learned that in his first week at the Palace of 9 Winds. The stone of the old temple, the root, they called it, ran beneath the palace like a sleeping animal. When people strode hard and angry, the floor seemed to stiffen, the faint grain in the tiles almost resisting the brush of his mop. When the courtiers and guards drifted by with their incense and knives and glitter, the floor went dull and patient. But when he moved quiet and hummed, the stone relaxed. It didn't bend or ripple, no magic tricks. It just gave him a sense of ease in the wrists and a smooth pull, as if the mop were sliding along a current. He wasn't supposed to hum. One of the stewards had told him that on his first day. "The root echoes words," the steward had said, nose wrinkled at the smell of human sweat. "Not whatever noise you people do." Jonah hummed anyway when no one was listening. It kept his head from filling with ghosts. The Hall of Echoes was empty. It was always empty in the first hour after dawn. The courtiers were asleep, the warriors training in outer rings, the kitchen staff busy with breakfast. Jonah had the pools and the maze of stairs to himself. He tucked the worn handle of the mop under his palm the way his mother had shown him years ago when she cleaned other people's houses, back when a house was the whole world and no one talked about stars. He made long strokes from the center to the edges, careful not to splash the ripple glass pool, careful around the lines of blue in the tiles that marked the root's old veins. The liquid in his bucket smelled like citrus and chalk. His shirt stuck to his back. He reached the dais, where the throne stood for festivals. He checked that the offering bowls were empty, that last night's flowers had been cleared. He leaned down and picked a shard of the pale glass from a crack. Someone had broken something, then kicked the pieces into the dark. He pocketed the shard and finished the pass. Down here, under the palace, there were no windows. The light came from long stone channels in the ceiling that glowed like frozen dawn, fed by the root's own breath. His hum fell into a lullaby without him meaning it to. It was habit, the one his mother used to sing in a voice rough from cleaning chemicals. A simple little piece about a star, about being safe. He closed his eyes and remembered the rhythm of sway, the soft knee rock of a tired body holding a sleeping kid. He barely realized he'd dipped the mop and had begun the rinse pass. Something shivered under his hand. He opened his eyes. Light slid along the edge of the dais, a faint, thin line like morning under a door. A curve of blue traced a path across the tile, following where his mop had gone. He froze and lifted the mop. The light faded. He frowned and stood very still. He could hear his own breath and his pulse, and somewhere there was the high sound of air moving in the hall's narrow vents. He touched the mop back to the floor. The light returned for a second, brighter now, and then winked out as if embarrassed. Jonah's throat went dry. He looked around the empty hall. "Okay," he whispered, smiling to nobody. "Hello? You! Human!" The voice snapped like a twig. He flinched and turned. A pair of palace guards stood in the archway, spears upright, their eyes black as wet stone under their crests of pale hair. The taller one lifted his chin. "What are you doing near the dais in the quiet hour? Step away." Jonah lifted the mop to show its dripping end. "Cleaning," he said, keeping his tone even. "I have a pass." He reached for the tag clipped to his belt, showed the stamped symbol burned into leather. The guard's eyes flickered over it, face pinched with the old irritation. "You have leave to clean, not to sing. Do not whistle to the root. It is disrespectful to the Empress." "I wasn't whistling," Jonah said gently. "Just working." The second guard peered over the taller's shoulder to the floor, then back at Jonah's face, as if needing to confirm the exact shape of a human mouth in case it produced more insults to stone. "Be quick," the tall guard said. "It is the Festival of Names this week. If you mark the floor, the Chamberlain will skin you to wipe it clean." "Understood." Jonah returned to his bucket. The guards moved on, their footsteps measured, their scent drifting in after them. The pepper-sweet oil all courtiers wore, the faint char of their spears' power cores. He finished without humming. He hauled the bucket back along a service passage where the old stone lumps gave way to smoother palace floors. The wall breathers sighed a little louder here, and the lights were business bright instead of holy. The corridor narrowed, and a bulkhead door was half closed ahead, its latch broken. He set the bucket down and wedged a wood block he kept for that, because the door always fell shut, and the runners never fixed it for servants' spaces. He was about to lift his bucket again when he heard a sound like a hiccup swallowed wrong. Jonah set the bucket down. He listened. Another small sound came from behind the row of cleaning carts, a quiet, muffled breath and the rustle of something scraping lightly on stone. He crouched and peered under the carts. A small figure scrunched in the shadow between a broken salt barrel and a stack of lint cloth. Jonah eased one of the carts aside and knelt on the floor. "Hey," he said, and kept his voice pitched low and soft. "I'm Jonah. Are you stuck?" The child jolted and banged an elbow against the pipe. Big eyes lifted to him, a night sea black that caught the light and made it burn white at the edges. A tri-forked crest lay flat to the skull. They were palace-born with that sweep of pale hair braided back and fastened in a little clasp. Their robe was good cloth, dyed with the Empress's house's deep blue and silver threads. A small trickle of blood marked the delicate skin at the ear. "I am not stuck," the child hissed, then swallowed and shrank a little. "I am resting." Looks like a tight resting place. Jonah nodded at the pipe. "May I help you up?" The child hesitated. Their nostrils flared as if tasting the air, then their shoulders loosened as the scent registered. Lemon, soap, sweat. "Yes, please," they said, and tried to make it sound flat and official and almost managed. Jonah reached out a hand. The child took it, fingers cool and light. He eased them out, mindful of the elegant little ear that had knocked the pipe. He pulled the cloth from his back pocket and dabbed at the spot. "May I?" They held still, though the crest trembled. "There we go," Jonah murmured. "Who ate you for breakfast?" The child blinked up. "No one ate me." "A figure of speech," he said. "Who tried to make you feel small?" A tiny offense crossed the narrow face, followed by something close to shame. "I should not complain. I didn't ask you to. I asked for the truth." He held up the cloth. "I can't clean anything if I don't know what the stain is." They looked at the cloth, something like curiosity pushing through the tightness. "Sethran," they muttered, "of House Vash. He said, I am hollow where there should be song. He said the temple will not answer me because I am a crackling reed." Jonah felt heat move up his neck. He kept it from his voice. "Is your name Hollow, then?" The child recoiled, crest bristling. "Or is it something else?" Jonah asked mildly. They pressed their lips together and lifted their chin. "Keither," they said at last, "second born to her radiance of 9 winds." Jonah bowed a little, palms open, one to chest and one to brow, the way he'd been taught to greet the palace-born when no one who mattered was watching. "I am glad to meet you, Kether second-born." The tension in Kether's shoulders eased a fraction. "Humans do not usually bow. Humans in palaces usually do. We just do it in closets and hallways so we don't get yelled at for doing it wrong." Kether stared at him as if he'd spoken a profanity. Then they made a small sound that might have been a laugh, and then, because relief opened the door, a breath that shook a little. "Here," Jonah said. He pulled the scarf from around his neck. A human thing, knit by an old woman in a rooming house, dyed a joyful red by someone who loved color, and looped it gently around Kether's head, covering the smarting ear. "It's clean," he said. Don't tell anyone that. It ruins my reputation. Cather's fingers touched the knit, then gripped it. I cannot wear this in the halls. It is not of the court. Then wear it here. Jonah closed their fingers around it. And take it off before you go back to the fancy. Cather's eyes dropped to the bucket, the mop, the scuffed knees of Jonah's trousers. You are a cleaner, they said. Janitor, he said, because it was a word he liked. It means the one who has the keys. I keep the doors. I take care of what people forget until it breaks and then they shout. Cather's mouth made a small O. You guard important doors? I stop important floods, he said. No one calls me a guard. It's fine. He tilted his head. Do you want to tell me why you were here? Or do you want to show me where you're supposed to be, and we pretend I didn't see? Cather's crest lifted and settled. I should go to lesson, they muttered. The High Cantor says I must practice speaking to the root. It is the festival soon. Do you like lessons? I like the songs. A small, fierce thing glowed in their voice. When I was small, the root whispered in my sleep. But when I stand on the dais and everyone watches, I am a rock. No mouth, no voice. The stone turns away. Jonah nodded once. Then let us go find the lesson. And you can keep the scarf until the ear stops shouting. Cather's tiny chin lifted. They slid out from behind the carts with grace that made Jonah think of lizards moving in sun, quick and precise. He took his bucket and followed behind, giving Cather space to lead. At the first corner, they turned and looked back as if checking he hadn't disappeared on them. He lifted the mop, a salute. Cather turned again, quicker now. When they reached the sun door at the end of the service passage, Cather halted and took off the scarf, folded it with excessive care, and handed it back. Thank you, Jonah, who holds keys, they said, and they put their palm to their chest, and then to their brow, a formal echo of his earlier bow. Any time, he said, and tucked the scarf over his shoulder. I won't be far from the hall. If you need... A forgotten door opened. Cather nodded once. Farewell. They slid into the light like a fish back into water. Jonah watched them go until they took the stair to the Cantor's rooms 2 flights up. Then he picked up his bucket and returned to the work. He didn't hum. But as he passed the root's veins, the hair on his arms lifted, as if the old place watched him leave. That night, over cold bread and hot tea in the servants' break room, Jonah opened his ledger. A single coin clinked into the dish he kept under his bed so that he could touch the metal in the dark and make it real. He had drawn a line in charcoal on the first page when he arrived in the city. He'd written a date under it, and then a name. Mara. He had added small tally marks for each day worked, each coin saved, each extra shift taken. The tally had crawled slow, like a stubborn vine. Tonight it touched a line he'd set for himself weeks ago. He ran his thumb over it. Another coin to your ghost daughter? Someone said behind him. Jonah closed the ledger and turned. Seema, a dishwasher, grinned at him over an armful of pots. She was small and square, and the skin of her forearms was scarred from grease pops, and her laugh could peel paint. When will she stop being a ghost and become a person we can feed? I have old bread. She is not a ghost, Jonah said, smiling despite the ache that always came with saying Mara's name out loud. She is delayed by the beautiful precision of palace paperwork. Beautiful, Seema snorted. Like my foot. You give me a dress, I go shout. I like my job, he said. You like your daughter more. Seema banged the pots down and lowered her voice. Be careful with Chamberlain Zaras. He counts everything that is not his as a theft. When have I stolen anything? Jonah asked, mock-offended. Seema looked pointedly at the bread in his hand. You steal my heart, she said, and laughed again. She sobered. You smell like the root. I always smell like stone dust. Not like that. She squinted at him. Did you walk wrong on it? He thought of the light at the edge of the dais. No. Good. She waved him off with sudsy fingers. Those things make rules when they hear you. They made rules for the Empress. They made rules for our dead. I do not want them making rules for you. She tilted her head. Unless rule says, serve Seema extra bread. That rule I accept. I will suggest it, he said gravely. I am very important. In the morning, he was sent to the menagerie pools. That meant scrubbing algae from the shallow basins where the bond beasts bathed, and fishing out molted scales from the vents, and calming down anything that decided his mop was an enemy. Most beasts liked water and ignored him. One did not. The creature crouched at the edge of the far pool, all rib and line and strange, a shape that reminded him of big cats on old Earth documentaries. Powerful shoulders, long body, sinuous tail. But where a cat had fur, this thing had plates like layers of wet slate and long whiskers that drifted on the water's surface like thought. Its eyes were copper, slit-pupilled and deep. A collar of metal circled its neck, studded with flash points. Rel, the handler had said with a shrug when Jonah asked. Wild caught, not yet bonded. Keep your hands, human. Rel lifted their head and hissed, a thin, empty sound like pipes gasping. Good morning, Jonah said. He kept his movements slow and wide so the handlers would see his empty hands. He sat on the lip of the pool, not close. He let his 2 feet dangle in the water and then, after a breath, put his palms on the warm stone and looked at Rel without showing teeth. I am here to clean your bath. Please don't kill me. My daughter would be sad. Rel did not move. You should ask him permission, Keither's voice said behind him. He has teeth and an opinion. Jonah smiled and looked back. Keither had changed clothes. They wore a simple white practice robe, their crest held back by a narrow band, their ear no longer marked. They looked smaller without the formal weight of royal colors, more like a child than a title. A pair of older children flanked them, trying to look like they were not watching Cather at all. One of them was Sethran. Jonah recognized the smug angle of the chin even before the ring on his finger caught the light. I'm asking, Jonah said to Cather. Very politely. Cather walked to the pool edge and sat beside him, mirroring his posture, their small feet in the water. Rel, they said, may we make your bath clean? Rel's whiskers trembled. Jonah kept his breath slow. He had learned with stray dogs back home. If you pretended your fear was boredom, the animal sometimes agreed to be bored with you. We will take the algae away, Jonah murmured. It will itch less. I promise no tricks. Rel lowered their head. The plate of the collar flashed once. Their whiskers brushed Kether's ankle. Kether went very still. Then Rel's tail twitched and, with immense dignity, they stepped into the pool and submerged. Something like delight broke across Kether's face. Jonah hadn't known how hungry that face was for simple good things. He blinked. Kether looked up at him, eyes bright, then down, embarrassed by their own smile. Don't get bit, Sethran drawled from the walkway. Some plumbers don't know when they're welcome. Janitors, Jonah said pleasantly. He scooped a palmful of water and flicked it at the slime. Plumbers are the ones everyone misses when they leave. Sethran made a face blocked by the polite stretch of lip he reserved for courtiers and guards. No one will miss you when you leave, he said, except the smell. Keither, the other child murmured, false sweet. Your lesson. Keither got to their feet. I will go, they told Jonah, formal again. Thank you for speaking politely to Rel. Thank you for giving me permission, Jonah said solemnly to Rel, because Keither listened to how people spoke to beasts. He gestured with his chin to Sethran and the other shadow. You two are very brave standing up there with your big, important ankles. Sethran's face reddened. Before he could speak, Cather looked at Jonah with a flash of panic, as if asking him not to get them into trouble, then vanished up the stair. Rel slid past Jonah with a soft hiss and low thrum. He felt the vibration through his bones. He scrubbed algae and tried not to think about what would happen when the festival came, and the palace's eyes turned to the root. He had the sense of walking toward a door he would have to open with bare hands. 2 days later, when he carried clean rags past the Hall of Echoes, the scanner pillar blinked and emitted a soft chime. Jonah stepped back and froze. The guard on duty, Talak, a middle-aged man with the narrow, seamed face common among palace lifers, lifted an eyebrow. "Back up," Talak said, more tired than hostile. Jonah backed up. The pillar's light guttered and then shone steady again. Talak sighed and waved him forward. Again. Jonah walked past. The pillar sang a low note. Talak scowled and thumped the metal with his fist. "Things been wrong all week." "It only chimes when I pass," Jonah offered. Talak gave him a look he'd seen from mechanics everywhere. The look that said, "I do not want your observations. Problems on legs. If I ask you to stand still while I recalibrate, the Chamberlain has to log the delay, and then he lectures, and I hate lectures. Go." "I could wait," Jonah said. "I don't mind." "Go," Talak repeated, the corner of his mouth flickering. Jonah went. He delivered rags to the archivist rooms. Old Mimzir of Sun Kin, leather brown and white-haired, received him with one eye on his tall stacks of vellum and thin slates. The archivist's rooms were the only ones in the palace where the scent of incense was mildew and the candles smelled of tree resin and ink. "You still hum the wrong songs in the wrong halls," Mizir said by way of greeting. "I hum the right songs everywhere," Jonah said, "and only when no one is listening." Mizir snorted. "The root is always listening." Jonah shrugged. He set the bundle down. His gaze drifted to the slab sitting on the central table. It wasn't there last time. It looked like a piece of dark stone, almost black, with a surface that drank the light. In the center, 3 small holes sat in a triangular pattern. "What's that?" Jonah asked. Mizir didn't look up. "A relic of the builders, we think. It was in a wall someone thought was pretty." The Empress liked the curve. The wall cracked. The builders had less interest in pretty and more in forever, and they won. Jonah lifted his hand without thinking and hovered it over the stone. The air over it seemed cooler by a breath. His skin prickled. He drew his hand back. "Don't touch that without permission," Mizir said. "I don't want to explain to the Chamberlain why a janitor's finger oil activated ancient curses." "Are there curses?" "Of course. Everything in this place is a curse. Some just eat slower." Mizir sighed and rubbed his eyes. He looked at Jonah, and the prickly warmth he kept for the palace melted a little. "You look like I did before the last festival, tired and trying not to be in love with a song." "I don't love songs," Jonah lied. Mizir sniffed at him like Rel tasting air. "Once, in the first days," he said in a different voice, "the builders walked with us. They taught us to call doors and quiet storms and carry messages on light. Then they fell quiet. Then we built a palace on top of their quiet. We put a throne on it and called it ours. We say the root belongs to the Empress because it scares us to say we stand on something that doesn't answer to a crown." Jonah watched his face. Mizir blinked and the world came back into the room with its dusty stacks and thin windows and a janitor with rags. "Don't sing at the festivals," Mizir added, gruff again. "If a human voice wakes old things, the court will complain for a century." "I don't plan to do anything wrong," Jonah said. "No one does," Mizir said. "That is why interesting things happen." When the day of the Festival of Names came, the palace smelled like burned sugar and thunder. The banners hung in the high halls, blue for the Empress, silver for the root, red for the guard, all cutting the air with heavy cloth. Courtiers painted their crests with crushed pearl and ate honeyed seed cakes. Servants ran in silent pairs in their washstone shoes. The Empress's voice, on a thin thread of sound relayed through hidden vents, announced the beginning of rites. Jonah cleansed his hands 3 times, out of habit, and because Seema had smacked the back of his head when he forgot. He carried his cart along the back corridor that led to the Hall of Echoes. The balconies that circled the hall were full, the upper ring glittering, the lower ring crowded with servants and guards. The dais shone with oil and polished stone, and the offering bowls were piled with fruit and carved salt and a dozen other things that meant hunger appeased. Jonah tucked his cart into the shadow of a pillar and stood where he could see the hall without being seen. The Empress stepped onto the dais. The air changed when she came in, not magic exactly, but an agreement of bodies. She was tall and thin as a lance, her skin the gray of Riverstone, her eyes old black. She wore the armor of ceremony, which was light as cloth and hummed faintly if you stood near. Her crest was braided tight and woven with threads of lightning glass. She lifted her hand, and the hall breathed out together. "Children," she said, and though there were 1,000 people in the hall, the word felt like it touched each one. "Rise and bring your voices." She turned her head a fraction. "Kether, second-born of my name, come." Jonah saw the small figure step from the line at the side. Kether's head was high. Their hands were clenched at their sides the way a runner clenches their hands before the gun to keep them from shaking. He wanted to call out something ordinary, like "you've got this" or "breathe," but his mouth stayed shut. He made himself small behind the pillar and watched. The High Cantor stood to the right of the Empress. In his feathery robes, his chest hung with crystal plates that caught the light from the root and threw it back. He lifted a hand, and the hall hummed a low note. He gestured Kether forward to the lip of the dais. Kether closed their eyes. They opened their mouth. Sethran's voice drifted from the balcony above. "Listen, the reed will crack." Jonah's hands went hot. He glanced up and saw Sethran leaning on the rail, his face bright with cruel hope. He looked across to the other side. Old Mizir stood with the archivists, his mouth a tight line. He caught Jonah's eye very briefly and shook his head as if to say, "Not yet." Jonah clenched his jaw until his molars ached. Kether took a breath. The first note wavered, small as a candle in draft. Jonah felt the root listening. He could feel it like he felt a crowded room notice a child. The note bent and steadied. Kether's head tilted. Their hands loosened. A faint blue line traced itself along the edge of the dais. Sethran's face fell into sour stillness. Jonah nearly laughed. Kether found a second note and then a third, building something like a path. The root opened a breath and let the path exist. Then someone else's breath moved the hall. It was a small thing if you didn't know what you were looking at, a shuffle by the back control panels where the margin lights were set, a soft click behind the wall where the shield dial lay. Jonah's eye followed movement like a trained dog. He saw a shoulder in a cloak, a gloved hand. He saw a small, cross-tilted crate at the base of an offering bowl he had not placed there. The air went cold. The faint, metallic taste that sometimes hung at the edge of the root when the wardens tested their armor blossomed on his tongue. Kether's third note cracked. The floor stuttered. The root's path blinked and the world slurred sideways. The line of blue died. The glow takes a breath from the hall, and everyone's new breath caught at once. Sethran's laugh was a soft, desperate sound, like someone kicking a dog because they were afraid of drowning. Kether's voice went high, almost a cry. Under the dais, the root spoke. It did not speak in words so much as in a long, deep sound, like a whale calling under ice. The wardens woke. Jonah heard their feet hit stone like hammers in slow motion. The invisible braces behind the hall's walls locked and a barrier slid between the dais and the lower ring with a thud. Cather was on the wrong side of the barrier. For a breath, it was nothing but white noise. 1,000 people remembering they were animals with bodies and fear. Courtiers seized their children. Guards drew weapons. The High Cantor shouted. The Empress lifted her hand, and the hall did not obey yet. Jonah was moving before his brain finished the plan. He kicked his cart sideways into the shadows and sprinted for the edge of the cleaning balcony that hung over the lower ring. He took the ladder like he was a boy climbing a fence to catch his runaway kite. He hit the floor and ran for the spot where the barrier had sealed. Cather stood on the dais, frozen, the place where the blue line had been now a bare edge over a blackness. The root's lake had gone dark, and the bridge, when the root answered a scion, it made a bridge from the dais to the far side. There was no bridge. There was only a drop and the pouring churn of something beneath, like glass sand falling. "Move!" someone screamed. "Hold!" the Empress shouted, and now her voice hit a note that made Bones jump to attention. But Cather was already moving, not away but toward the edge, small face set. They're going to try again, Jonah thought, even as his body braked at the barrier. He saw the small breath Cather took, the way their mouth shaped a note. "Don't!" he said, and then felt stupid. Saying don't to a drowning is only your own fear, not their help. Jonah touched the barrier. The stone was cool and alive and very old. He smelled chalk and lemon and sunlight on wet rock. And that was wrong, because there was no sun here. He put his palms flat and closed his eyes and did not plan to do this. His throat didn't ask permission. His lungs found the pitch they'd learned before he had words, and he hummed. The barrier keyed under his hands. Light woke like breath under skin. A small spot of blue flared under his left palm, then another under his right, and then a line joined them like a human hand taking a partner and deciding to walk. "Open," Jonah said softly, and felt a laugh in his chest like the first time he'd made Mara stop crying with the ridiculous sound of a squeaky giraffe. "Please!" The barrier unstitched precisely between his hands, a slit the width of his shoulders. He stepped through. Someone grabbed him, a guard, his spear a firm line across Jonah's chest. "Human!" the guard snarled. It was Talak. His eyes were very wide. "Stop!" "Cather!" Jonah said. His voice came out too loud. He lowered it. "Cather is going to fall!" "That is royal concern," Talak said, automatic, his training trying to build walls around his fear. "You will be—" The wardens stepped onto the floor. They were not men in armor. They wore no cloth. They were stone, walking with purpose. The Root's children, tall and patient and vast. Their faces were smooth. They had no mouths. A script none could read ran along their limbs like veins. They moved like mountains learning a dance. They faced toward the dais. Every guard on the floor raised their weapon in the same breath. Jonah saw Talak's hands tighten. "Talak," Jonah said, and dragged the older man's gaze back to him. "Look at his foot." Cather had put one foot to the edge of the drop. Their toes curled over the stone, a child's bare feet in the Hall of Kings. They took a breath. Jonah moved. He ran up the dais steps 2 at a time. The wardens turned their heads. That would have been a problem, because the wardens, when they moved anything they needed out of the way, but they did not move then. They watched him. They did not step. "Stop that idiot," someone shouted. "It's the janitor," someone else said, disbelieving. Cather turned their head at the sound, and that saved them. Their heels slipped at the edge, their weight tipped into the drop, and their body remembered to fall. Jonah dove. He didn't think about the fall or the fact that only the ancient stone and a hungry black drop waited beneath. He thought about small feet, about the way Mara's foot had felt in his palm that first day she took a step, about the time he had learned to catch a kid falling off the porch without hurting either of them. His hand found Kether's wrist. The connection hurt like hitting a wall with his bones. He grunted, belly flat on the dais, Kether's weight at the end of his arm. The Root's breath rushed up from the dark like he'd opened a door to a winter field. "I've got you," he said. He didn't look down to make it real. He looked at Kether's face. "I've got you." Kether made a small sound, big with swallowed crying. Their fingers were ice on his skin. Jonah dug his toes into the line where a seam in the stone made purchase. He pulled. His shoulders screamed. Kether kicked and got an elbow on the edge. Jonah hauled again, then again. Kether's chest hit the dais, and then they were both sliding backward, breath like a burn. He lay on his back, Kether's small ribs heaving under his hand. He wanted to throw up. He swallowed it. The wardens stood motionless within the arc of the high cantor's raised staff. That was wrong. They should have come to stand between the drop and the child. They should have made a bridge. They did not. The air smelled wrong again. Jonah turned his head and saw a thin trickle of black sand seeping from the base of a broken offering bowl. It ran like water, but drank the light in a way that made his eyes hurt. It touched the blue line at the edge of the dais, and the line went dead and did not wake. "That's your mess," he thought at the Root. "Old place, that's your poison. Let me fix it." Kether's fingers tugged at his sleeve. Their eyes were wide and full of something that had nothing to do with being watched by househeads or mocked by other children. It was old fear and new guilt. "I could not call," they whispered. "I could not." "Not your job," he said. "Not your fault." He found their hand and squeezed once. "Can you sit up? Can you breathe?" They nodded fiercely, angry at their own lungs, and pushed themselves upright. Jonah stood. The Empress watched him from across the barrier, her face a strict line. For a heartbeat, he thought the mask of royalty would break, and she would shout at him. She did not. She watched. "Human," the High Cantor said, brittle with outrage. "Get away from the dais." Jonah put one hand on the stone and felt the cold like a nerve. He was terrible at the palace's polite words. His mouth always found the ones that worked when something was already broken. "No," he said, "you have a spill." The High Cantor stared at him as if Jonah had suggested he toss the Empress into the pool to see if she floated. The guards took a half step, and the Empress lifted her finger, and they stopped. "Show me," she said. Jonah pointed. "It eats the lines." Talak, mouth thin, edged closer and peered over the lip of the dais. He squinted at the black trickle. He swore softly in a soldier's language. "Null sand," he said. "How?" "Someone put it where the offerings are," Jonah said. "It sits until we touch the root. It makes a dead patch. The swelling pushes the pressure points. The bracing triggers. The wardens wake because everything tells them it is an attack." "Someone?" The High Cantor made the word a blade. "Who would dare?" "The Ash Crown," Imzir said from behind the barrier, and his old voice had no softness in it now. "Or someone clumsy who wanted to be them. The Null was in customs last month. We lost a dram of it. We told the Chamberlain. He told us we were alarmists." Jonah didn't look at the Chamberlain. He was busy counting the ways he would not be blamed. "What do you need?" the Empress asked Jonah almost conversationally, and the hall made a sound like a field when wind sweeps it. Jonah blinked. "Permission." Silence. He fixed his eyes on the Empress's face. "To open wrong doors, to use water, to tell your guards to hold instead of hack. And I need lime and the alkali wash and the kind of sand that doesn't eat light. Also, sacks and hands, servants' hands, people who know how to carry and follow and not argue every time I say something." He expected her to order him away. He expected her to lean into outrage to protect her fear. Instead, she lifted her hand and made a cutting gesture that sent messengers sprinting, even though she said nothing. She looked at Kether and at Jonah's hand on Kether's shoulder. The slightest grief moved at the corner of her mouth and vanished. "Do it," she said. "Wardens hold." The wardens turned their heads, that patient mountain movement, and spread themselves around the dais, their stone arms forming a ring. The guards lowered their spears. The nobles breathed out and tried to remember dignity. Jonah squatted at the lip of the dais and leaned forward. The black sand looked like light trying to be a thing. It flowed into cracks and drank. He could smell it now. Nothing. It had no smell. Everything else in the root had a scent. Scratches of salt, stone, old water, the faint iron like blood drying. This had none. He hummed, because it helped him focus, and because the root liked being spoken to even if the speaking was only his own throat reminding him he was alive. He touched his fingers to the edge of the black. It did not try to jump to him. It was not greedy. It was just null. He spotted the source, a fracture behind the bowl. He could get at that. "Breathe slow," he said to Keither, because he could hear their fast breath and wanted to give them something to do. "Sit with your back straight. Pretend no one is watching. Imagine you are talking to Rel. Tell the root what the light feels like when it rises under your feet." Keither nodded. He could tell they wanted to say, "I will fail." They swallowed it. They sat. Seema arrived with a line of kitchen hands, all of them with the pots and heavy sacks that made her biceps sing. "You owe me 2 loaves," she told the root by way of greeting, "because sometimes you can only talk to gods if you pretend they are customers." "Lime here," Jonah said, gesturing to the hairline in the stone where the null had bled in. "Alkali wash on my mark." He glanced at Talak. "I need a guard with a strong arm." Talak looked like a man halfway through admitting that his god was a starfish with a hat. He lifted his chin and stepped forward. "What do you need me to hit?" he asked, and when Jonah grinned, he did not grin back, but something in his face said he wanted to. "Not hit," Jonah said. "Hold. Do not let me fall." He lowered himself flat and edged his shoulder into the gap behind the offering bowl. He braced his feet on the joint he'd used before. He held his breath because the dust back there smelled like old spice and rot. He got his fingers around the small crate he'd seen earlier, wedged into the crack like a tooth lost in gum. He tugged. The crate came free with a sound like a cork leaving a bottle. Talak's hand on Jonah's belt saved him from falling into the null. He sat up with the crate and pulled the lid off. Inside, little cloth bags like sachets lay torn, some pouring black sand. "Whoever planted that," Talak said, voice even and strange, "will not have a mouth for very long." "Later," Jonah said. He was shaking. He got the washpan and poured the alkali over the thin trickle. The smell was sharp and good and woke the old reflexes of clean. The black drink of light shivered where the liquid touched it and slowed. He dumped lime into the hairline cracks, then more wash, until the null pulled back. The root's faint blue line looked sullen and then curious, like a child who's been told they can come out from under the table now. "Sand," he said to Seema. "Throw it like you're salting a stew." She snorted and did it exactly right. They worked in a rhythm that belonged to kitchens at rush hour and flood nights, when the bathroom on the second floor burst. Jonah heard the root respond, not words, but a little more light in the old veins, and a little less panic in the air. "What the sweet rot are you singing?" Seema muttered, breathless. "A lullaby about a star," he said without thinking, and Seema's head jerked once. Surprised, she had heard the tune. Everyone had. He sang it under his breath in the break room when the younger servants cried. He sang it to the mop bucket when he hurt too much to say his mother's name. "Again," Cather whispered from his corner of the dais, not to him, but to the root. "Again, please. I am here." Jonah didn't look at them because if he looked, he would have to feel too many things. He spread the last of the lime into a thin ribbon that cut the null from the largest vein of the root's edge. He poured the wash, then waited and watched, because cleaning is waiting as much as scrubbing, and then he saw it. a pale line along the floor as shy as a new moon. He slid his fingers over that line. He sang the first bars of the lullaby. The line thickened. It was not for him. He knew that. The root belonged to crowns and the dead. But in that moment, he felt like the floor took his breath and put it back in his mouth clean. "Now," he said to Keither without turning. "Call it. Ask it to listen." Keither inhaled, shook out their arms like a diver about to step off cold stone, and opened their throat. The note they found was not large. It did not fill the hall. It did not humble the noble crowd. It found the place in the line the null had bitten and laid itself like balm. The blue brightened. The root, slow and old, began to build a bridge. The hall made a sound. The Empress set her hand on the hilt of the ceremonial blade at her side, the way someone puts a hand on a friend's shoulder when the friend gets to their feet without knowing if they can stand. The wardens began to move again. They stepped into a ring around the bridge and raised their arms. Guard spears went down. Mothers stopped squeezing their children's hands so hard their fingers would bruise. Jonah exhaled. His body remembered he was thirsty. He reached for the washpan to throw the last arc, and then the air changed again. Something else landed in the pool of the root under the bridge. It wasn't null. It was sharp and hungry, and it moved like living things do when they think they own the ground. Jonah had one stupid, furious thought. I clean one mess and someone vomits in the kitchen. A figure in the back of the hall pulled a weapon that wasn't a palace weapon. The barrel had been sawed short and wrapped in cloth to hide it. Talak turned and shouted. The shot made no sound. It made a hole in the air that hurt the eyes. It hit the root's mirror and broke a section of it into spinning pieces of light. The bridge faltered. "Down!" Talak roared. The crowd broke the way crowds break when someone pulls fire into a place with no air. They tried to go everywhere at once. The High Cantor lifted his staff, and a barrier rose around the throne. The courtiers struggled to get under it like hens trying to hide under one wing. The Empress didn't move. Rel hit the barrier from the side like a hammer under a silk scarf. Jonah didn't know how the beast had gotten loose. He didn't know who had removed the collar, or if Rel had learned to break it with their whiskers on the power nodes. Rel slid to the dais stairs and crouched there like a cat under a table, ridiculous and beautiful and lethal, their plated sides heaving, their eyes fixed not on Jonah but on Keither. The shot man ran. Another bolt of muted, destructive light spit out of the short weapon and tore at the warden's legs. Stone shattered. A warden went to one knee and put their hand down like a mountain stopping a flood at a door. The bridge dimmed another measure. "Keither," Jonah said, "I need you to do something I should never ask anyone to do. I need you to be loud." Keither's mouth tightened. "How?" "Love it," Jonah said. He tasted blood and couldn't tell if it was his or the hall's. "Not the people watching. Not me. Not your—" He jerked his chin toward the Empress without looking, because if he looked he would have to see her eyes. The root, the old place, the thing that breathes under this, the one that listened to you when you were a baby. Love it loud, make a mess of love, it will hear. Keither's chest rose, their throat worked. He saw the moment fear lost its words. They turned their face to the floor and sang. He had heard women open their mouths and birth children. He had heard old men say the name of the thing they loved best, as if they were letting it go into someone else's hands. He had heard his mother, who worked until her knuckles cracked, sing him a tune about a star like she was hanging a light above a bed in a room with no electric. Keither's song was small and fierce, and made the root sit up like an old dog and put its head on his knees. The bridge surged. Light climbed like a vine made of water. The warden's broken legs knitted like wood in frost thaw. The shot man lifted his weapon again, and Talak drove into him from the side like a bull. The weapon coughed into the ceiling and left a dark hole there with glowing edges. The chamberlain screamed at the damage to his ceiling and then saw the weapon and all the air left his body. Rel climbed onto the dais. The Empress took one step forward and half the guard grabbed her automatically, which made her turn and hand them their own fear to hold. Rel's head dipped. They made a sound Jonah had not known they could make. It was like a harp being plucked by a heart muscle. "Kether," Rel said, and it wasn't words, but it was Kether's name without the part of the throat that had consonants. Kether's song bent toward the beast like a hand offering a piece of meat. Rel's whiskers flared like new grass in rain. Rel put their jaw on the dais and made themselves small as a mass of plates and muscle and hunter instinct could. Kether extended their hand without fear and laid it on Rel's nose. A bond is a thing that makes electricity weak and envious. The root felt it like rain in dry earth. The air sweetened. "Good," Jonah whispered. And then the world came back to him fast and hot and bright in the form of pain. The wardens moved a fraction too slowly for the second shot from across the hall. Talak had the weapon man pinned, but he had a friend. The friend shot for the high canter because if you want to knock tables over, you kick legs. The bolt hit the canter's staff. He went down with a noise no one used unless they thought the old stories were dying for good. The barrier flickered. The single person under it who didn't flinch was the Empress. Jonah's body decided to move because thinking had gotten slow. He went to his knees and put both palms on the root. He didn't sing a pretty song. He made a noise like a mother trying to not cry while she buys medicine with the last cash. It wasn't for anybody but the floor. The light that ran in the veins rose to meet his hands like water when a boat comes home. The root's voice spoke. It did not make a sound in the hall. It made a word in Jonah's head. It said, "recognized." It gave his name with a rhythm inside it. Reyes, Jonah, human, Wayline 17, soft key. He hid his face because he had waited 20 years to have a door say his name back to him. He had not known it would hurt this much when it came. "Maybe later," he whispered into the stone. "Children and idiots with guns now. Talk later." The root did not care. It gave him the same word again and then made a new one. Authorized. "Good," Jonah said, "because arguing with floors is bad form." He lifted his head. His hands stayed on the veins. "Wardens," he said, feeling like a child in an old church who'd been asked to read a verse in front of the king. "Protect the children." He nodded at the crowd of terrified noble offspring clutched in their parents' arms on the far side. "Make a wall behind the Empress. Seal the breach. Also," he hesitated, "make a bridge for Kether." The wardens turned their heads together and then did what he asked. Stone flowed like rice in a sack poured slow. A thin wall grew behind the Empress. The bridge. This time it wasn't a glowing thread struggling to be alive. It was a clean line. It grew under Kether's feet like an understanding. The second shooter tried to run. A warden put a hand down where a door was, and suddenly there was no door. The shooter stared at the stone like it had betrayed him, then turned. And Talak's training earned its keep in one clean motion. The man went down. The weapon skittered under a servant's heel and shattered into unhappy glass. "I would like," Jonah said to nobody who could answer, "for this to be over." Kether's song faltered, not from fear now, but because their throat was a child's throat. Rel made the harp sound again and kept his jaw on the dais like a dog told to stay while food placed in front of them. Jonah felt the root turn its head toward the beast and put a little light along Rel's whiskers. Rel shuddered, a whole body ripple like a mountain loosening from a long-held posture. The bridge completed its arc to the far end of the hall. The root's mirror smoothed. The black null, smothered in lime and wash, sulked. The Empress did not move, until Kether did. The child lifted their hand from Rel and took a step, then another. They didn't look at the people watching. They looked at the floor like they were reading a book. When they reached the far edge of the bridge, the root made a little sigh of light, the way a father does when he lets go of the bicycle and the kid doesn't fall. Jonah took his hands off the stone. The root let him. The hall broke into voices. Some prayed, some shouted, some tried to remember how to be dignified after being animals. The chamberlain had lost the thread and was counting bowl shards out loud, as if the sum could put the world back into a ledger. The Empress met Jonah's eyes across the suddenly ordinary space. The way she looked at him made his chest hurt in a new place. It wasn't gratitude, it wasn't surprise, it was recognition. She had lived long with a palace under her feet. She knew what voices belonged and what notes did not. She had just watched an old thing put a hand through the skin of the world and touch a human's head. "Come," she said. The word was soft, but it traveled under the breath of everyone else, like a boat cutting a small, steady path in a crowded river. Talak leaned in and muttered to Jonah, "If you run, I will not stop you. It would be funny." "She'll just call my name again," Jonah said, and his mouth was dry. "And the floor will repeat it, and the chamberlain will faint. Better to walk." He stepped off the dais. The crowd made a hesitant path. People looked at him the way they look at men who come out of a fire holding a child, wonder and a little disgust at the smell of smoke. He reached the barrier that had sealed earlier, and it unstitched for him between his palms like a friend warming numb fingers. He walked until he stood 6 paces from the Empress. He bowed as well as he knew how. It was probably wrong. He didn't care. "Your Radiance," he said. He kept his hands where she could see them. Rel patted at his back, very close, a wall of heat and plate. "You have my child's scarf," she said, eyes flicking without moving from his face. Jonah flushed. "Only borrowed," he said. "I have not put it in the wash." A sound like a laugh escaped someone behind her and then died. "What did the root call you?" the Empress asked him. "Jonah Reyes," he said. "Human, janitor." Her mouth twitched. "And?" He swallowed. "Soft key." The words were absurd in his mouth and too big for his tongue. The Empress was silent a long moment. It was not a cruel silence. It was the silence of a person measuring a piece of cloth against an old pattern and finding that it matched in a way that made their heart hurt. "When I was a child," she said, "the old cantor told me a story. He said that when the builders left, they did not trust crowns. They trusted hands. They left keys in the mouths of people whose work was to fix what breaks. He said one day a hand would touch the root that had more stories in it than the root had moss, and it would wake and remember the way to mend. He said it would be a human's hand, because the builders like to speak jokes into history." She looked at his rough knuckles. "He would have liked you." "I'm not a joke," Jonah said, his hackles up without warning. "No," she said, and the warmth in the word flattened the fear that rose when anyone noble turned their attention on him. "You are dangerous." Jonah blinked. "I'm sorry?" The Empress stepped closer, not to intimidate, but because she could not speak quietly across a gulf. Rel rumbled, then went still as Jonah patted a plate. "You are dangerous," she said again, "because you fix things without asking who dirtied them, because you do not care who sees you doing it, because you will climb where you're not invited if a child is there, because the root said your name and you did not take it as a crown, but as another mop to carry." Jonah opened his mouth. The words didn't know their way out. He closed it and shook his head. "I have watched you," the Empress said. "We all watch. We pretend we do not. But the throne sits under the shadow of falling stone. I would be a fool not to watch the ones whose hands make the floor smooth when the day is done. You took a punishment last week that belonged to House Vash's spoiled boy because he did not want to smell like spilled oil. You let my child borrow your scarf. You hum when you work. You smell like simple things, and I have missed simple all my life." She reached and put 2 fingers under Keither's chin. "You did not fall," she said softly. "I had help," Keither whispered, and the look they gave Jonah was a small, blazing sun. "Yes," the Empress said, and then she looked at Jonah and did something no one in that hall expected. She lowered her head. Grown people gasped. The Chamberlain made a noise like a kettle. Talak coughed into his hand. Rel flicked their whiskers. "Thank you," the Empress said, and the old pride in her voice made thank you sound like a craft you learned for years, like building a house from the ground. "For my child, for my hall, for making the root remember love." Jonah's breath shook. He had been bowed to by a queen in the wide kitchens of Earth when he had killed a cockroach with his bare hand while she screamed on the counter. This felt nothing like that. He put his hand to his chest and then his brow, clumsy and honest. "You're welcome." The Chamberlain found air and tried to get it to obey him. "Your Radiance," he cried from behind her shoulder. "This human has compromised security, touched the dais without sanction, and—" "Chamberlain," the Empress said without turning her head, "there is null sand in my bowls and a hole in my ceiling. If you want to scold someone, I will permit you to scold whoever did that. If you cannot find them, practice on your own face in a mirror." Seema snorted tea out her nose. Several servants coughed in ways that were not laughs, but were definitely laughs. The Empress straightened. "Jonah Reyes, soft key," she said, and the name did something to the air, like a pin going through a silk. "I cannot afford to let you keep walking places alone. Will you take a guard?" "I have Rel," Jonah said, because the only answer he could come up with to the idea of having a guard was a joke that would get him fired. "He has Rel," Kether said quickly, surprised by their own boldness. A child's voice can carry truth like a torch. "Rel wants to go with him." They put their hand back on Rel's nose. Rel's tail thumped once on the stone like a dog's tail in a pew. The Empress's brow went up. "Apparently he does." "And Talak," Jonah said, because the older guard was a stubborn man. "And stubborn men are the anchor you need when the floor moves. If he wants. If no one makes him eat his heart for letting me through a barrier." Talak looked like he was trying to remember the last time someone had asked him for something and not made it a demand wrapped in politeness. "I do not want to eat anything of mine," he said dryly. "I will take the shift." "Done," the Empress said. "We will speak again when the hall is clean and the children are settled and my Chamberlain has finished fainting." She cast a glance toward Sethran, who had suddenly found something very interesting on the ceiling to stare at, and her mouth went flat. "And there will be lessons in the art of apologies." She lifted her head. "For now, return to your work, people of my house." The hall began to move. Work returned like water finding its old riverbed. Cleanup. Always the end of every miracle. Jonah was the last to leave because he was the one who checked the seams twice. He cleaned the last black from the edge of the dais and nudged the final bit of broken glass into a bag. Rel followed him like thunder. Kether sat for a long time at the bridge's far end, their feet dangling into the root's mirror, their face calm for the first time since he'd met them. "That last note," Jonah said as he passed them to go put his tools away. "Keep it. Use it when you have to climb the stairs." Keither's mouth softened. They nodded. Their fingers brushed the hem of his sleeve and then withdrew, shy of being seen. In the quiet after the noise, he went back to the archivist rooms. Mazir sat at his table with his head in his hands. He lifted it when Jonah entered and regarded him like a man looking at a map he'd read all his life and finding a new river drawn across it in a hand he recognized. "You," Mazir said, finger stabbing the air. "What did it call you?" "Soft key," Jonah said. He pulled a sealed flask of cleaner from his pocket, and set it on the table beside the builder relic, as if he were offering a cup of good wine to an altar. "And some numbers. 17. Wayline." Mizir shut his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were wet and angry. "We gave those fools the paper about waylines," he snapped. "They put it in a drawer. The last human ship to come through this part of the sky stopped over the route when it was still a field of stones and rain. The builders put their hands on your people's heads in a way they did not on ours. They will sing humble, the texts say. They will carry circuitry in their breath instead of armor on their back. They will mend us when we are tired and when crowns have made us too sharp to touch." We told the High Cantor. He said we were poetry. I said he was bad poetry. He said I was old. I said yes. Jonah sat. His legs had forgotten how. "So you, Mzir said, pointing again, "are one. There may be others, but you are one. And the root knows your name because the builders laid their hands on a woman named Luce Reyes 300 years ago and taught her to hum before her ships learned how to land here without breaking their knees." Jonah's heart did something and then something else. He put his hand over it. It didn't help. "My mother," he said very carefully, "the way you step on ice you are not sure will hold." She sang. "Always. She cleaned and sang. I learned her songs. He stopped. He stared at the flat black stone with its 3 holes, how it drank light and gave none back. He thought of the lullaby about a star and how it always made him feel like he was looking up through a small window in a very high wall and seeing a kindness he could not reach with his hands. Mizir reached into a drawer and set something on the table between them. It was a small tile the size of Jonah's palm. In it was a carved pattern, 3 holes set not in the shape of a triangle, but like the curve of a mouth. It had lines etched from each hole like rays. "The 3-note, Mzir said. "They wore it when they called doors. We thought it was jewelry. It is not. Put your fingers in those and hum." Jonah laughed, raw and exhausted. "Archivist?" "Do it," Mzir said. "Or I will do it and open a hole in your floor and complain about my knees." Jonah looked at his hands. He put 3 fingers into 3 holes. He hummed the first bar of the lullaby. The tile pulsed once in his hand like a small animal waking. Across the room, a shelf leaned forward as if new gravity had whispered hello in its ear. "Don't," Jonah said, and the shelf returned to itself. He exhaled. He set the tile down. His hands shook. "I have a daughter," he said. "Her name is Mara. She is waiting for the paper the Chamberlain promised 3 months ago so she can come here. I only came to this planet to bring her the money I didn't have to make her laugh when she's 60. I am not looking for crowns. I am not looking for keys. I just want to make a life," Mzir said. He rubbed his face. "It is always the ones who want to make a life who end up carrying the door." That evening, after the hall had been scrubbed, and the Chamberlain had stopped counting, and the guard had switched, and the nobles had gone home to change their names for a night, in a way that made them feel safe, Jonah took a basket of peelings to the beast yard. Rel lifted their head from their paws when the gate clicked. They huffed. They put their chin on his knee so he would scratch the plate just behind their whiskers where it itched and hurt and felt like home. He scratched it. Kether slid out of a shadow as if they'd been waiting there all along, which they had. "Does the root talk to you?" Kether asked him bluntly. "Because children, even royal ones, do not care about doors when there are answers waiting in the rain." "Yes," he said. "Like a song without words. Will it talk to me if I don't wear the Empress's colors?" Kether's voice went very small. "Will it talk to me if I go to the hall without the High Cantor and just sit?" "If you let yourself love it for nothing," Jonah said. "If you don't make it a test. It likes kitchen messes and spilled tea. It likes when someone sits with beasts until their breath slows. It liked when you touched Rel." He scratched Rel's plate again, and Rel made a soft sound like gratitude. Kether took a breath like that hurt, and then did it again until it didn't. "Will you come with me?" "Tomorrow," he said. "After my shift." "Now," Kether said, and he realized the festival had taken the meat off their bone, and what was left needed something quiet. They were not asking a janitor to guard them. They were asking a person to sit with them while their heart shook. "Now," he said, and stood. Rel stood with him. They walked the back way down to the hall, Kether's small step careful, Rel's pads silent. Jonah carrying nothing and feeling strange without weight in his hands. He palmed the barrier, and it unstitched and stitched again around them with the ease of a tale someone has told many times. The root breathed in the empty hall. It smelled like cleaned plates and quiet. Kether sat with their feet in the mirror lake. Jonah sat beside them. For a while they said nothing. Rel lay with their chin on the stone and watched Kether's face like a mother with a new sleeping thing. Kether began to sing very softly. Not to call, not to make a bridge, not to prove anything. It wasn't the high cantor's song. It was off-key in places. It sounded like nails on a window and a father's good sweater. The root listened the way old things do when a young thing calls their true name without knowing it. Jonah leaned his head back against the pillar and hummed the line his mother had given him to hold when the wall was high. He hummed it not for the root, not for a queen or a crown, but for a girl named Mara, half a planet away in a damp room with a broken radiator, who would come soon if paper stopped pretending it weighed more than love. He didn't fall asleep. He did not feel safe enough to sleep in halls with crowns. But when Kether's head settled slowly on his shoulder and then slid, heavier, into his lap, and Rel's breath sounded like a forge banked for the night, and the stone under his hand felt like the back of a friend, he let his eyes close, only for a breath. They were still there when the Empress came to find them. She stopped at the edge of the light and watched a while. She took in the small shape of her child asleep in a human's lap, and the bond beast's jaw on his foot, and the way he curved his body in a shape that would let him jump without dropping the head on his thigh. She took in the way the root's veins ran a fraction brighter under his palm. She made a choice, and came without guard. He set a finger to his lips when she approached. She lifted her hand in apology and sat on the step below them. "Talak says you do not own a proper weapon," she said, not much above a whisper. "I own a mop," he murmured, "and a bucket. And the root said my name. I think that counts." "In some wars," she said, "a mop is enough." He smiled. And that made something in her face soften enough to show the part of her that had not been Empress since she was 12. "You approved the paper," he said, because the thing closest to his heart was always going to be a child. "For my daughter." "I did," she said. "The Chamberlain has signed. He will pretend the root made him do it. I will let him keep that lie. It makes him larger in his own head and smaller in mine." Jonah closed his eyes and kept them closed. If he opened them, he would be a man in a hall crying in front of a queen, and he had done enough strange things today. "She will arrive in 8 days," the Empress said. "It is on the schedule for the Western Pier. Talak will go meet the ship. He enjoys shouting at dock officers. It makes his wrinkles happy." "Thank you," Jonah said. He kept his voice steady with both hands. You saved my child," she said. "You saved my people from a panic that would have killed more than the knives would. You saved my hall, and you opened a door in my head I did not know I had. We are even." He opened his eyes. "No one is even with that." "No," she said. She smiled into her lap and then back at him. "No, we are not. That is why love is not a ledger and thrones are bad at it." Kether shifted and burrowed their face into Jonah's scarf, which they had stolen again. The Empress carefully eased the edge of the scarf away from Kether's mouth so they could breathe, the way 1,000 mothers do when they sit and watch a sleeping. Her fingers brushed Jonah's knee. He did not move. "When your daughter comes," she said, "I will arrange rooms for you near the hall. You will keep the root clean and listen when it speaks. And teach my child how to listen too, and if you do more than that, we will talk when we get there. I will not put words like warden and keeper on you until you ask for them, but the root has already done so, and I am not in the habit of arguing with old friends." He lifted his hand from the root and set it on his knee next to hers. They sat like that, not touching, close enough to share the small warmth of bodies, and watched the tiny beacons of light move in the channels overhead. "Will Sethran be feeding Rel for the next month as apology duty?" Jonah asked after a while, because he had been born with a petty streak that loved seeing a bully made to carry buckets. The Empress smiled with all her teeth, a private wicked thing. "I was thinking too," she said, "and cleaning the kitchens under Seema. That will cure anyone of the idea that work is an insult." "He will hate it," Jonah said. "He will live," she said, and her voice made living sound like the gift it always was. They sat until Cather woke with a soft sound and checked for witnesses, and then pretended to be brave. The Empress kissed the ridge of their crest. Rel yawned so wide their plates flashed like a fan of knives, then closed their mouth and put it back on Jonah's foot, as if his foot were an altar where peace was left. Jonah walked them back to the upper halls and watched Kether walk more sure on the stairs. In the days that followed, everything felt the same and different. The way a kitchen feels after the light is changed, but the tables are in the same place. The root hummed under his mop. Sometimes it answered small, like a cat moving its ear under a touch it likes. Sometimes it did nothing, and he was grateful, because dinner waited, and too much miracle makes a man forget to buy cabbage. Talak ended up at his side often, making jokes that sounded like threats and threats that sounded like jokes. Seema made him eat a third of whatever she baked along with her domestic criticism, and made the Chamberlain cry twice with a calmly delivered syllable. Mzir came up with notes so old, the palace computers refused to store them and made copies on vellum like a rebel. Kether came without guard to sit with him when the hall was empty. They spoke of unimportant things, how Rel's whiskers tickled, how the smells of the kitchens told you the day of the week better than any calendar, how the stone in winter felt different under bare feet than in summer. He taught Kether the art of scrubbing a circle that made invisible dirt say its name. Kether taught him to hear the faint distortion in the hall's breathing that meant a ward had shifted a hair's breadth and needed coaxing. And when the day came that the ship docked from the western pier and Talak came in smelling of salt and fish and paperwork and stood in the doorway like a man who would rather fight 10 people than put his heart in front of one, Mara came in holding the hand of a guard and looking as if she had just climbed a ladder to the sky and found her father at the top. Jonah went to her knees because his knees were what touched the earth when he prayed. Mara slammed into his chest like a smaller Rel. Her laugh cracked open the hall. He cried into her hair because he had stored water for that moment all the days of his life, and now he could pour it. When he turned, the Empress had stepped back to let them be big and messy without a witness. Kether stood near Rel, pretending to be calm and failing badly. "Mara," Jonah said when he could speak, cupping his daughter's face, "this is Kether. He is complicated." "I am royal," Kether said immediately, and then flushed after the words came out. "But mostly I am small." Mara peered up with the keen look of a child who has decided to love the world on purpose because it is better than hating it. "Do you like stars?" she asked. "Yes," Kether said solemnly, because he had learned that liking things out loud makes them more real. "Good," Mara said. "My dad sings about them." "I know," Kether whispered, reverent. And the way they looked at Jonah's mouth made Jonah want to laugh and cry at the same time. The Empress came after a while and did not say anything important. She looked at Mara the way people do when they smell bread in a house that doesn't have a stove. She put a hand on Jonah's shoulder in passing and called him by his name without title. It felt like a new room in the palace had been added just for him. A small, ordinary one with a bed and a window. That night, when the hall was empty and the root run quiet, Jonah took his daughter and sat at the edge of the mirror. He told her the story of a boy who put his hand into a dark and found the handle of a door, and of a stone that liked cleaning songs, and of a beast that chose to be gentle when it could have been a knife. He did not tell her about crowns and null sand yet. She would learn those on her own. Mara fell asleep on his arm. Rel snored softly at his feet. Kether, drooping and stubborn, lasted until his head hit the other shoulder. The root hummed warmer under his palm, like a big old thing that had found a family sleeping on it and decided to keep the light on in case they woke afraid. "Soft key," the root said in the place behind his eyes where old voices go, recognized, authorized, home. Jonah closed his eyes. He was a janitor still. He would be a janitor until he could not work. He would clean what spilled and climb what broke and keep keys to doors no one else wanted to touch. And when he had to, he would sing, not to be a king, not to make people look, but because old places and small hearts needed the same thing. The sound of someone speaking love into a dark and waiting for it to answer. The palace above would keep humming, guards and kitchens and chambers, and the small infernos of pride people mistake for warmth. The hall would see more festivals. The root would sleep and wake. Children would grow and call new bridges. Mara would run the stairs and make Rel forget she was terrifying. And if the black sand came again, as it always does under 1,000 different names, there would be hands. A human's, a child's, a beast's whiskers, an old archivist's pen, an empress's small bow. There would be the strange power of those who fix, because someone must. "Good night," Jonah murmured to the stone, and the sleeping, and the old voice, and the root brightened a fraction and dimmed again, like a lighthouse some builder long dead had left for a crew they trusted to come home without maps. He hummed the tune his mother had given him. He hummed it very softly, because the hall was resting, and because he knew now that when he spoke into old stone spoke back. Somewhere, in the shallow rooms behind a queen's private door, an empress leaned her head against wood that had been polished by other heads before and let herself fall asleep for the first time in years without dreaming of the floor cracking under her child's feet. The night held them all the way until the second dawn. Then a janitor's alarm clock went off, because old powers and new families still like clean floors. He eased sleeping heads into pillows, slid out from under the weight of love, and went to get his bucket.